Matthew 26, verses 17 to 25. On the first day of the festival of thin bread, Jesus' disciples came to him and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare the Passover meal?" Jesus told them to go to a certain man in the city and tell him, "Our teacher says, 'My time has come. I want to eat the Passover meal with my disciples in your home.'" They did as Jesus told them and prepared the meal. When Jesus was eating with his 12 disciples that evening, he said, "One of you will surely hand me over to my enemies." The disciples were very sad, and each one of them said to Jesus, "Lord, you can't mean me." He answered, "One of you men who has eaten with me from this dish will betray me. The Son of Man will die, as the scriptures say, but it's going to be terrible for the one who betrays me. That man would be better off if he had never been born." Judas said, "Teacher, you surely don't mean me." "That's what you say," Jesus replied, but later Judas did betray him.
"Surely not I, Rabbi. Surely not me. Surely not in this time and place of my own living." The feasting that marks the story of change, of escape, of God's activity in the world becomes the time when humanity's greatest grievance and disturbance showed itself. Ugly, distressed. The disciples were distressed. This was supposed to be a great celebration, but not tonight. This night was suddenly turning out very different. Have you ever had that sense when suddenly life was going to be very different? Have you stepped into a room and thought, yeah, this day is going to be a different day. It won't be what I thought it might be. They are uncomfortable days. They are uneasy days. They are days when we are distressed. They are days when we encounter within us what is ugly, the betrayal that we carry within, whether we know it or not. They came for a feast, but they encountered distress. They came to recall and mark a special story, and they bumped into betrayal. God, in this day, may we not be blinded by fear, but open to the reality of the betrayal that we carry within. May we have courage to encounter it and find a new way of living beyond it. Where it tears our human community apart, bring your light, that it is exposed and transformed. Betrayal. When we know its presence, we know our full humanity. This night, long ago, when betrayal was known, the night began to grow dim.
John 13, verses 1 to 20. It was before Passover, and Jesus knew that the time had come for him to leave this world and to return to the Father. He had always loved his followers in this world, and he loved them to the very end. Even before the evening meal started, the devil had made Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, decide to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that he had come from God and would go back to God. He also knew that the Father had given him complete power. So during the meal, Jesus got up, removed his outer garment, and wrapped a towel around his waist. He put some water into a large bowl. Then he began washing his disciples' feet and drying them with the towel he was wearing. But when he came to Simon Peter, the disciple asked, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You don't really know what I am doing, but later you will understand." "You will never wash my feet," Peter replied. "If I don't wash you," Jesus told him, "you don't really belong to me." Peter said, "Lord, don't just wash my feet. Wash my hands and my head." Jesus answered, "People who have bathed and are clean all over need to wash just their feet. And you, my disciples, are clean, except for one of you." Jesus knew who would betray him. That is why he said, "Except for one of you." After Jesus had washed his disciples' feet and had put his outer garment back on, he sat down again. Then he said, "Do you understand what I have done? You call me your teacher and Lord, and you should, because that is who I am. And if your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you should do the same for each other. I have set the example, and you should do for each other exactly what I have done for you. I tell you for certain that servants are not greater than their master, and messengers are not greater than the one who sent them. You know these things, and God will bless you if you do them. I'm not talking about all of you. I know the ones I have chosen. But what the scriptures say must come true. And they say, 'The man who ate with me has turned against me.' I'm telling you this before it all happens. Then when it does happen, you will believe who I am. I tell you for certain that anyone who welcomes my messengers also welcomes me, and anyone who welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me."
Water, a bowl, a towel. Vulnerability dressed down from the outer garments. The touching of feet, dry, dusty feet, smelly feet. Feet that have trod upon the earth day after day after day. Feet that have covered many countries, collected the stories from many people, many hopes, many fears, many dreams, much despair. Where have you walked? What country have you crossed? What stories have you collected? Where did you see vulnerable service? Was it you who offered it to another? This sacred moment is held in only one place in our sacred texts of faith. Yet we often practice this vulnerable service within community. I cried when my feet were washed by one who had been through the toughest journey of her life. Her islander community was struggling to find a voice and a place at the table of our church, of our wider faith community. I cried because she too knew of my own struggles at the time, deeply hurt by a colleague. She knew. Her hands of colour washing my feet of stark white. She cared for me in a way that can only speak of this moment between Jesus and his disciples. We gifted to each other a place, a voice, a care. We gifted to each other vulnerability and service. Vulnerable God, take our feet, dress us down. May the gentleness of care, of service, stretch into our hearts, that we might bear to one another that same gentleness of care, of service, of place. May we gift each other. Washing feet, vulnerability, dressed down from the outer garments, revealing rawness of humanity, a rawness where darkness is rest.
Matthew 26, verses 26 to 35. During the meal, Jesus took some bread in his hands. He blessed the bread and broke it. He then gave it to his disciples and said, Take this and eat it. This is my body." Jesus picked up a cup of wine and gave thanks to God. He then gave it to his disciples and said, "Take this and drink it. This is my blood, and with it God makes his agreement with you. It will be poured out so that many people will have their sins forgiven. From now on, I am not going to drink any wine until I drink new wine with you in my Father's kingdom." Then they sung a hymn and went out to the Mount of Olives. Jesus said to his disciples, "During this very night, if all of you will reject me, as the scriptures say, I will strike down the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised to life, I will go to Galilee ahead of you." Peter spoke up, "Even if all the others reject you, I never will." Jesus replied, "I promise you that before a rooster crows tonight, you will say 3 times that you don't know me." But Peter said, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never say I don't know you." All the others said the same thing.
A loaf of bread, a cup with the fruit of the vine, a blessing, an action, a meaning, an insight, a covenant. This is what will hold us together until I come to complete my work in creation. Every time you gather and break bread, every time you share poured wine, you will tell of this moment. You will tell of the story that we are about to live through. You will tell of the promise that is there for what God will yet do, for the love that is God. We wrestle with forgiveness. We wrestle with being fallible, imperfect, failed, and wrong. We wrestle with wanting for ourselves at the cost of another, sometimes not knowing, sometimes not being aware. And yet, we still lean into that activity of self-protection. Denying. From eternal covenant of hope and love, denial will sit beside, somehow locked together. Perhaps each of them generating a depth that we are yet to fully recognise, one that we are yet to fully appreciate. Perhaps our own denial prevents us from seeing it to begin with. The denial will come later in the night, but it begins here in this moment, when the bread is broken and the cup is shared. Denial starts here when Jesus says, "I will be broken, I will bleed, I will die, and I will rise." Words not yet fully comprehended, surreal perhaps. God, we say we will follow you all the days of our life, but there are days when we do not. We hold in our hands often broken bread, dripping with the fruit of the vine. Yet the promise of life, of love, slips through our fingers. May we know the deep holding, even when we fail to hold the reality of grace, constantly held in broken bread and poured wine. The bread broken, the wine poured. Blessing, covenant, promise. Love in all and through all that is. Denial still creeps in. Denial. A reality that dims for now.
Mark 14, verses 32 to 42. Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he told them, "Sit here while I pray." Jesus took along Peter, James, and John. He was sad and troubled and told them, I'm so sad that I feel as if I am dying. Stay here and keep awake with me." Jesus walked on a little way. Then he knelt down on the ground and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, don't let this happen to me. Father, you can do anything. Don't make me suffer by having me drink from this cup. But do what you want and not what I want." When Jesus came back and found the disciples sleeping, he said to Simon Peter, "Are you asleep? Can't you stay awake for just 1 hour? Stay awake and pray that you won't be tested. You want to do what is right, but you are weak." Jesus went back and prayed the same prayer. But when he returned to the disciples, he found them sleeping again. They simply could not keep their eyes open, and they did not know what to say. When Jesus returned to the disciples the third time, he said, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough of that. The time has come for the Son of Man to be handed over to sinners. Get up, let's go. The one who will betray me is already here."
Frightened, frustrated, agitated, upset, anxious, crying out, heavy eyelids, deep, dark night. There are moments when all we want to do is cry out with deep, wordless emotion of our pain. We hope for a better moment to live through, but somehow we know it just won't be. We don't want to be alone in this moment, yet those who might share it with us are battling to meet their own human need. Sometimes it's us who feel failed. Sometimes we are the ones who fail others. We aren't who they need us to be for them. The language of the heart is prayer. It is to cry out to God who is beyond us when all that seems overwhelming and all is rushing towards us. Our heart yearns for something beyond. It's an innate response that we can't avoid. It's an inbuilt gift for us as created beings. Jesus, the one who stood as human, the one who stood as God, the one who holds all the yearnings of our heart in our deepest, darkest nights, the crying, the failing to watch, to be with. The one who has lived in that moment of wanting, of hoping against hope, of looking for another option, yet knowing that what is to come must be. There was no other way. Courage beyond self, a divine courage. God, you have stood in the place of our deepest, darkest nights. You have cried out. You have yearned and hoped. You leant into what must be and held divine courage. In our deepest, darkest moments, may we take hold of that courage. When our hearts yearn for another way, may we know that you meet us there. The night is cooling. The betrayer is coming. The longing has been uttered. The failing to be with has been lived. The dark of the night deepens.
Luke chapter 22, verses 47 to 52. While Jesus was still speaking, a crowd came up. It was led by Judas, one of the 12 apostles. He went over to Jesus and greeted him with a kiss. Jesus asked Judas, "Are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' disciples saw what was about to happen, they asked, "Lord, should we attack them with a sword?" One of the disciples even struck at the high priest's servant with his sword and cut off the servant's right ear. "Enough of that," Jesus said. He then touched the servant's ear and healed it. Jesus spoke to the chief priests, the temple police, and the leaders who had come to arrest him. He said, "Why do you come out with swords and clubs and treat me like a criminal?"
I don't like it when things get messy, when there is shouting, angry noises, and things seem out of control. I don't like it when people get hurt. There is a cry because of pain. But it is just so, just is. The betrayer, the soldiers, the disciples who fell asleep, and those who not long before had declared they would never leave, sat on the cusp of disappearing from sight, with fear pulling them. This would be messy. This would be chaotic. This would be noisy. This would be uncomfortable. Jesus, you seemed to hold that moment though. You called out enough. You brought healing to the enemy, even though you were about to be taken away. With vulnerable power, you slipped under all that was collapsing around you, even though with a word you could have stopped it. You slipped into darkness. And when we are in darkness, you are there also. When it seems too much, when it seems too empty, it is not, for you have occupied that space. When we fear that moment of absence of life, you are already placed with life into that space. They came. Jesus was kissed. A flurry of arrest led away. Darkness just seemed to deepen. In the deepest darkness, absence, emptiness was God.